Imagine waking up on a Tuesday morning in Brisbane, making yourself a coffee, and knowing that while you slept, your money sent you another paycheck. That is the dream a lot of Aussies are chasing right now. And today I'm going to show you exactly how much you need invested to actually live off dividends forever. Living off dividends in Australia is genuinely one of the most achievable forms of financial freedom on the planet, and the reason is something almost unique to us. It's called franking credits. When an Australian company pays you a dividend, they've usually already paid 30% company tax on those profits. The government gives you that tax back as a credit. So when you see a 4% dividend yield on the ASX 200, the real grossed up yield is closer to 5.5 or even 6%. This system was introduced back in 1987 by the Hawke government to stop the same dollar of profit being taxed twice, once at the company level and again in the hands of the shareholder. Australia and New Zealand are among the only countries in the world that still run a full dividend imputation system like this. In the United States, the United Kingdom, and most of Europe, dividend investors get hit with double taxation, which is why an ASX portfolio paying 4% can outperform a US portfolio paying the same headline yield on an after-tax basis. Let's start with the number that matters most. How much do you actually need to live a comfortable life in Australia? The Association of Superannuation Funds of Australia, which is the gold standard for this kind of research, says a single person needs around $54,000 a year for a comfortable retirement, and a couple needs around $77,000. That's having private health insurance, running a car, taking a domestic holiday, and going out for dinner without stressing. Of course, if you want the lean version, a modest lifestyle is closer to $35,000 for a single and $51,000 for a couple. And if you're chasing the full fat lifestyle, overseas trips, eating out whenever you want, maybe upgrading the car every few years, you're realistically looking at $100,000 or more. Now here's where it gets interesting. The average dividend yield across the ASX 200 sits at around 4% in 2026, and once you add franking credits, that grosses up to roughly 5.5%. If you go heavier into high yield names, you're looking at a yield closer to 5.5 to 6% before franking and around 7% grossed up. So depending on how you build your portfolio, your real yield is somewhere between 5 and 7% in today's market. Let's use 5.5% as a sensible, realistic number for someone holding a diversified Aussie dividend portfolio. So let's run the actual math. If you want $50,000 a year in income, you divide that by 5.5% and you need around $910,000 invested. If you want $75,000 a year, you need roughly $1.36 million. If you want $100,000 a year, you need about $1.82 million. And if you want to live the genuinely luxurious life on $150,000 a year, you're looking at around $2.7 million. And here's the part that should excite you. These numbers aren't reserved for high-income earners or people who inherited money. The average Aussie who starts early enough and stays consistent will absolutely hit these numbers. But hold on, there's a catch most people forget: tax. Even with franking credits, you still pay marginal tax on dividend income above certain thresholds. The good news for Aussies is the tax-free threshold is $18,200, and franking credits effectively shield a huge chunk of your dividend income from extra tax. In fact, if dividends are your only income, you can earn around $30,000 in fully franked dividends and pay basically zero net tax because the franking credits offset your tax bill completely. Now let me show you the path most people miss. You don't need to save $900,000 from scratch. You need to invest consistently and let compounding do the heavy lifting. If you invest $1,500 a month into a diversified Aussie share portfolio averaging 8% total return, which is well below the long-term ASX average, you'll hit $900,000 in about 19 years. Bump that to $2,000 a month and you're there in around 17 years. Start in your late 20s and you're financially free before 50. The other lever most people ignore is the account structure used to hold these investments. Holding dividend-paying shares inside superannuation means the income is taxed at just 15% during accumulation and zero in pension phase once retirement age is reached. That's why a lot of Australians targeting dividend freedom run a dual-track strategy with one portfolio inside super for long-term tax efficiency and a second portfolio outside super for income that can be accessed before preservation age. Now here's the thing. Chasing the highest yield is the single biggest mistake new dividend investors make. If you see a stock paying 12% on the ASX, it's almost always a value trap. Either the price has collapsed because the business is in trouble, or the dividend is about to be cut. The companies that pay sustainable, growing dividends decade after decade are the boring ones. The big banks, Wesfarmers, BHP in good years, Telstra, Woolworths, the major insurers. They're not exciting, but they pay you forever, and forever is the goal here. There's also a smarter way to do this than picking individual stocks, especially when you're starting out. Aussie Dividend ETFs do the heavy lifting for you. VAS gives you the entire ASX 300 with a yield around 3.5 to 4% plus franking. VHY targets higher yielding companies with around 5 to 6% before franking. There's also iShares IOZ, BetterShares INCM for monthly income, and a few others that give you instant diversification across 50 to 300 dividend-paying companies with one trade. For most Australians, a simple 2 ETF portfolio will outperform 90% of stock pickers over 20 years, and you'll sleep a lot better. It's also worth knowing how these distributions actually land in your account. Most Australian ETFs pay quarterly, in January, April, July, and October, while individual ASX shares typically pay twice a year, with interim dividends around February or March and final dividends around August or September. That uneven payment schedule is why many income-focused investors deliberately mix ETFs and direct shares, so the cash flow lands more evenly across the calendar year. Some even build what's called a dividend calendar, lining up holdings so a payment arrives almost every single month, which makes the transition from salary to dividend income feel a lot smoother when the time finally comes. Now let's talk about the part nobody likes to hear: inflation. If you need $50,000 to live today, you'll need around $67,000 in 10 years and around $90,000 in 20 years, assuming 3% inflation. The reason dividend investing still works long-term is that quality Australian companies grow their dividends over time, usually faster than inflation. The big banks have grown dividends roughly 4 to 5% per year on average, across decades. That's how a dividend portfolio actually keeps you free. There's one more piece I want you to hold on to: the Dividend Reinvestment Plan, or DRP. While you're still building your portfolio, instead of taking the cash payouts, you can automatically reinvest every dividend back into more shares. This is where the snowball really starts rolling. Your shares pay dividends, those dividends buy more shares, and those new shares pay more dividends. By the time you flip the switch from accumulation to living off the income, your portfolio is producing dramatically more than it would have if you'd been spending dividends along the way. So let's bring it all together. To live off dividends forever in Australia, you're realistically looking at between $900,000 and $1.8 million invested, depending on your lifestyle. You can hit that by investing consistently into quality Aussie dividend stocks and ETFs, leveraging franking credits to slash your tax bill, avoiding high yield traps, and giving compounding the runway it needs to work. If this video helped you, do me a favor and hit the like button. It helps more Aussies find this content. If you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.